I stood in that sterile courtroom, watching my own parents' lawyer argue that I should be legally forced to sell my apartment to pay for my sister Jessica's messy divorce settlement. 3 months earlier, I thought I had the perfect family. My parents Robert and Margaret owned a successful construction company. Jessica and I were close, and my software engineering career was thriving. But now, staring at the judge who would decide my financial future, I realized my family had never seen me as their son. They saw me as their personal ATM, and they were willing to destroy me to get what they wanted. 3 months before that nightmare courtroom scene, I was debugging code in my downtown Seattle apartment when Jessica burst through my door, tears streaming down her face. My 32-year-old sister looked completely disheveled, her usually perfect blonde hair tangled, and her mascara creating dark streaks down her cheeks. "Hardy, I need your help," she sobbed, collapsing onto my leather couch. "Brandon's lost his mind. He's filing for divorce and trying to take Emma away from me." I set my laptop aside and moved to comfort her. Jessica had always been the dramatic one in our family, but this felt different, more desperate, more raw. "What happened?" I asked, handing her tissues from the coffee table. "He says I'm financially irresponsible." Jessica hiccuped between sobs. "He emptied our joint accounts and moved out. My lawyer says I need $60,000 for legal fees and to secure custody of Emma. I can't lose my daughter, Hardy. I just can't." My heart broke watching my sister fall apart. Jessica had made some questionable financial decisions over the years, but she loved 6-year-old Emma more than anything. The thought of her losing custody seemed impossible. "Have you talked to Mom and Dad?" I asked. Jessica's face crumpled further. "They've already spent their retirement savings bailing me out before. Remember when I defaulted on that business loan? And when my credit cards got out of control? They can't help this time." I did remember. Over the past 5 years, our parents had repeatedly rescued Jessica from various financial disasters. Each time they'd stressed about their own security, but couldn't bear to watch their daughter struggle. "I'll figure something out," I promised, though I wasn't sure how. 2 days later, Mom called requesting a family meeting. I drove to their suburban Bellevue home, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial where I'd grown up. Dad was waiting in his study looking exhausted. At 58, Robert Thompson had built his construction business from nothing, but recent stress was showing in his gray hair and deeper wrinkles. "Son, we need to discuss Jessica's situation," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Your mother and I have been talking." Mom joined us, carrying her usual chamomile tea. Margaret Thompson had always been the family peacemaker, but tonight she looked strained. "Jessica needs $60,000 immediately," she began. "Her lawyer requires a retainer, and she needs funds for a custody evaluation and expert witnesses. Brandon has hired an expensive attorney," Dad added. "If Jessica doesn't match his legal firepower, she could lose Emma entirely." The weight of their words settled over me. "What are you suggesting?" Mom and Dad exchanged glances before Dad continued. "You have equity in your apartment. Maybe you could refinance and help family during this crisis." I owned my 1-bedroom downtown apartment outright, after 5 years of aggressive saving and strategic investments. At 28, I'd worked 60-hour weeks at my software company, lived frugally, and built substantial savings. My apartment was my security, my independence. "I'd need to think about it," I said carefully. "Of course," Mom agreed quickly. "We're not asking you to decide tonight." But something felt off. Over the next week, Jessica kept texting updates about her lawyer meetings and court dates, thanking me repeatedly for agreeing to help. When I called to clarify that I hadn't actually committed to anything yet, she seemed confused. "But Mom said you were refinancing to help me," Jessica insisted. "I already told my lawyer the money was coming." My stomach dropped. "Jessica, I never agreed to refinance anything." "What but Mom specifically said?" Jessica's voice trailed off. That evening, I confronted my parents at their house. "Did you tell Jessica I agreed to help financially?" I asked directly. Mom fidgeted with her teacup. We may have mentioned you were considering it. You told her I was refinancing my apartment before I'd made any decision. I said, feeling manipulated. We knew you'd want to help family, Dad said defensively. You've always been responsible and caring. You put me in an impossible position, I realized aloud. Now if I don't help, I look like I'm abandoning my sister and niece. Hardy, that's not fair, Mom protested. We're asking because we trust your judgment and your success. But I was beginning to see patterns I'd never noticed before. Growing up, my parents had always praised my responsibility and academic achievements while excusing Jessica's impulsiveness and poor decisions. They'd positioned me as the family problem solver, the one who could handle anything. I need time to research refinancing options and consider the implications, I said firmly. Dad's jaw tightened slightly. Time is something Jessica doesn't have. Her custody hearing is in 6 weeks. Then she should have planned better. I snapped, immediately regretting my harsh tone. Mom gasped. Hardy, how can you be so cold toward your sister? I'm not being cold. I'm being practical about a major financial decision. As I left their house that night, I felt the first crack in my family foundation. They'd manipulated the situation to pressure me into a decision, using my love for Jessica and Emma as leverage. The realization made me sick to my stomach. Over the following days, I researched Jessica's divorce proceedings online. Court records showed Brandon had filed citing irreconcilable differences and financial disagreements. Nothing indicated gambling addiction or the wild spending Jessica had described. Something wasn't adding up, and I was determined to find out what. The pressure from my family intensified immediately after I asked for time to consider the refinancing decision. What started as reasonable requests quickly escalated into a full-scale emotional assault designed to break down my resistance. Mom began calling twice daily, each conversation following the same manipulative script. She'd start with casual family updates, then pivot to Jessica's deteriorating mental state. Your sister barely slept last night, Mom reported during one particularly painful call. She's terrified Brandon will convince the judge she's an unfit mother, all because she can't afford proper legal representation. Mom, I'm still researching refinancing options, I explained for the 10th time. Research. Her voice turned sharp. Hardy, your niece's future hangs in the balance and you're worried about paperwork. This isn't some business transaction. This is family. The guilt hit like a physical blow. I understand the stakes, but I need to make an informed decision about my financial future. Your financial future? Mom's tone grew cold. What about Emma's future? What about your sister's sanity? Sometimes family means sacrificing for people you love. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment feeling like a selfish monster. Emma was an innocent 6-year-old caught between warring parents. If I could help secure her custody for Jessica, shouldn't I do whatever necessary? But the emotional manipulation wasn't limited to phone calls. Jessica began sending text messages throughout the day, each one more heartbreaking than the last. Photos of Emma crying, supposedly asking why Uncle Hardy wouldn't help them. Screenshots of legal documents showing court dates and filing deadlines. Voice messages where Jessica sobbed about feeling abandoned by her own family. I never thought my brother would choose money over his niece's well-being. One particularly devastating text read, Emma keeps asking why you don't love us anymore. Dad took a different approach, attacking my sense of family loyalty and gratitude. During an unannounced visit to my apartment, he stood in my living room, looking disgusted. You know, son, your mother and I sacrificed plenty for your success, he said, examining my furniture and electronics with obvious judgment. We worked extra hours to pay for your college application fees, bought you a reliable car for internships, supported you through those unpaid programming boot camps. I paid for college myself through scholarships and student loans, I reminded him. But who provided the foundation? Who gave you stability and encouragement? Family investment goes beyond just writing checks. His words stung because they contained enough truth to feel valid. My parents had provided emotional support and encouragement throughout my career development. They'd celebrated my achievements and offered advice during setbacks. "Now your sister needs the same support we gave you," Dad continued. "But instead of stepping up, you're hiding behind financial concerns and legal research. That's not the son we raised." The accusation cut deep. Was I being selfish? Had my success made me greedy and disconnected from family obligations? Mom escalated the campaign by threatening permanent consequences for my refusal to help immediately. "If Jessica loses custody because you wouldn't help, I don't know how our relationship can survive," she told me during another tearful phone call. "How could I look at you the same way knowing you chose your bank account over your niece?" "That's not what this is about," I protested. "Then what is it about, Hardy? You have the means to help. You have the opportunity to save your sister and niece. But you're choosing not to act." The constant pressure was affecting my sleep, my work performance, and my mental health. I found myself questioning every aspect of my relationship with my family, wondering if I was really as selfish and ungrateful as they suggested. But something nagged at me about Jessica's story. Her claims about Brandon's gambling seemed inconsistent with what I remembered about my brother-in-law. Brandon worked as a mechanical engineer for Boeing, had always seemed financially responsible, and genuinely loved Emma. I decided to investigate independently, starting with public records and social media research. What I discovered shattered my remaining sympathy for Jessica's situation and revealed the extent of her deception. Jessica's Instagram account, which I'd never closely examined before, showed a troubling pattern over the past 2 years. Photos from expensive spa weekends in Vancouver, designer handbags and shoes far beyond what her part-time marketing job could afford, luxury dinners at Seattle's most exclusive restaurants with her friend Ashley, a divorced socialite known for her extravagant lifestyle. But the most damning evidence came from banking records I accessed through a financial background service. Jessica hadn't lied about their joint accounts being emptied, but she'd left out crucial details about who spent the money and how. Over 8 months, Jessica had made massive withdrawals for shopping sprees, spa treatments, and weekend getaways. $7,500 at Nordstrom in a single afternoon. $3,000 at a luxury spa resort. $4,000 for a weekend trip to Las Vegas with Ashley, including charges at high-end casinos and exclusive nightclubs. Meanwhile, Brandon's transactions showed grocery stores' utility payments, Emma's school expenses, and regular transfers to their daughter's college savings account. He'd been trying to maintain household stability, while Jessica systematically drained their financial resources. The discovery hit me like a physical punch. Jessica hadn't been victimized by Brandon's gambling addiction. She'd been financially abusing him while he tried desperately to protect their daughter's future. But the evidence went deeper. Text message records I obtained through a private investigator showed Jessica coordinating expensive purchases with Ashley, bragging about her spending sprees, and dismissing Brandon's concerns as controlling behavior. "Brandon's being ridiculous about money again," one message read. "He acts like I can't buy myself nice things. I work too, and I deserve to enjoy life." Another text revealed Jessica's true attitude toward financial responsibility. "Why should I stress about bills and savings? That's what husbands are for. I didn't get married to become some boring housewife counting pennies." The investigation also revealed that Brandon had tried repeatedly to get Jessica into financial counseling, had suggested budgeting systems, and had even offered to take over all bill paying to prevent further financial damage. Jessica had refused every suggestion and accused him of financial abuse for trying to limit her spending. Court filings painted an even clearer picture. Brandon wasn't seeking custody because he wanted to hurt Jessica. He was seeking primary custody because Jessica's financial irresponsibility and emotional instability were creating an unsafe environment for Emma. Documentation showed Jessica had bounced multiple checks for Emma's school activities, had failed to pay for health insurance premiums, and had forced the family into significant debt to fund her lifestyle choices. Brandon was fighting for custody to protect his daughter from financial chaos and emotional manipulation. The truth about my family's manipulation became crystal clear. Jessica wasn't a victim of Brandon's gambling addiction. She was a financially abusive spouse who'd spent her family into destruction, then lied to our parents to secure their emotional and financial support. And my parents, rather than demanding accountability from Jessica, had decided to transfer her financial crisis to me through guilt manipulation and emotional blackmail. For the first time in weeks, I felt clarity instead of confusion. My family hadn't asked for my help. They demanded my financial sacrifice to enable Jessica's continued irresponsibility, while positioning me as the villain for questioning their demands. The emotional manipulation campaign had revealed their true priorities: maintaining Jessica's lifestyle and avoiding consequences for her choices regardless of the cost to my financial security and independence. I was done being their family ATM, but I had no idea how far they were willing to go to force my compliance. Armed with evidence of Jessica's financial deception, I requested another family meeting to confront the lies and manipulation. I arrived at my parents' house on Sunday evening with printed bank statements, social media screenshots, and court documents that revealed the truth about Jessica's divorce. Jessica was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with red-rimmed eyes and tissues clutched in her hands. She'd perfected the victim pose over the past month, and seeing her performance now made my stomach turn with disgust. "I'm glad you called this meeting," Mom said, settling into her chair with obvious relief. "We were hoping you'd come to your senses about helping your sister." "I did come to my senses," I replied, spreading the evidence across the table. "But probably not the way you expected." Jessica's face paled as she recognized her own social media posts, showing expensive purchases and luxury experiences. Dad leaned forward to examine the bank records, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding. "Jessica," I said directly, "you lied about everything. Brandon never had a gambling problem. You spent your family savings on shopping sprees, spa weekends, and luxury vacations while Brandon tried desperately to maintain financial stability." "That's not true," Jessica protested weakly, but her voice lacked conviction. "These are your bank records." I continued, pointing to specific transactions. $7,500 at Nordstrom while Brandon was buying groceries. $3,000 at a spa resort while he was making Emma's school payments. You destroyed your own marriage through financial abuse, then blamed Brandon to manipulate family sympathy. Mom looked shocked, examining the evidence with growing horror. "Jessica, honey, is this accurate?" "You don't understand the pressure I was under," Jessica said, switching tactics from denial to justification. "Brandon was controlling and demanding. I deserved some happiness and relaxation." "You deserved happiness at the expense of your daughter's security," I shot back. "You forced your family into debt to fund your lifestyle while Brandon tried to protect Emma's future." Dad studied the court documents with increasing anger. "You told us Brandon was gambling and abandoning his responsibilities." I simplified the situation. Jessica admitted, tears flowing more dramatically. "But the result is the same. I need money for lawyers, and I need family support." "The result is not the same," I said firmly. "Brandon's not fighting for custody because he's vindictive. He's fighting to protect Emma from financial chaos and emotional manipulation." Jessica's victim mask finally slipped, revealing something harder and more calculating underneath. "Fine," she snapped. "Maybe I spent more money than I should have. Maybe I didn't tell you every detail about our marriage problems. But I'm still family, and I still need help. Are you going to abandon me because I made some mistakes?" "I'm not abandoning you," I replied, "but I'm not enabling your irresponsibility by destroying my financial security either." Jessica stared at me with undisguised hatred. "You're selfish and cruel just like Brandon. I hope you're happy knowing you chose money over family." She stormed out of the house, slamming the front door with enough force to rattle the windows. I expected my parents to acknowledge the evidence and apologize for pressuring me based on lies. Instead, Mom turned to me with disappointment etched across her face. "Even if Jessica made mistakes, she's still your sister," she said quietly. Family means supporting each other through difficult times, not judging and abandoning. Supporting each other doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior, I countered. Dad folded the bank statements with deliberate precision. Jessica may have been irresponsible, but that doesn't change her current situation. She still needs legal representation, and she still could lose custody of Emma. I stared at them in disbelief. You're still asking me to fund her legal bills after seeing proof that she caused this entire crisis through financial abuse? We're asking you to help family, Mom said. Whatever mistakes Jessica made, she's learned from them. This legal battle gives her a chance to start fresh and be a better mother. Their response revealed something chilling about my family dynamic. Evidence and accountability meant nothing compared to their determination to avoid consequences and maintain Jessica's lifestyle. They'd rather manipulate me into financial sacrifice than demand responsibility from her. I'm not refinancing my apartment to enable Jessica's continued irresponsibility. I stated clearly. She created this situation through her choices, and she needs to face the consequences. Dad's expression hardened. That's your final answer? Yes. Mom began crying softly. I never thought I'd raise a son who could be so heartless toward his own family. 2 days later, I received a certified letter that changed everything I thought I knew about my parents and their character. The return address showed a law firm I'd never heard of, and the contents made my blood run cold. Thompson versus Thompson. A lawsuit filed by my own parents claiming I owed them $68,000 in loans and financial support they'd provided throughout my life. They were demanding immediate repayment plus interest, and they were seeking legal authority to force the sale of my apartment to satisfy this fabricated debt. The lawsuit claimed my parents had provided down payment assistance for my apartment purchase, which was completely false. I'd saved every dollar myself and had documentation proving it. They claimed they'd paid for my college education when I'd actually graduated with student loans and academic scholarships. They claimed they'd provided ongoing financial support throughout my 20s when I'd been financially independent since graduation. Every claim in the lawsuit was a lie, but the legal action was real. My parents had hired attorneys and filed court papers demanding money I didn't owe for support they'd never provided. The psychological impact was devastating. My own parents were attempting to legally steal my home and savings through fraudulent claims and fabricated debts. They'd consulted lawyers, prepared false documentation, and initiated legal proceedings designed to destroy my financial security. But the shock deepened when I discovered additional documents attached to the lawsuit. My parents had somehow filed liens against my apartment, claiming I owed them money for college expenses, graduation gifts, and family support that had never existed. The liens appeared official and were registered with King County, creating clouds on my property title. I called the county recorder's office to verify the liens and discovered they'd been filed using forged documents that claimed I'd signed loan agreements with my parents. Someone had forged my signature on papers I'd never seen, creating fake legal obligations that threatened my property ownership. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a desperate attempt to help Jessica. This was a premeditated conspiracy to steal my assets through fraud and legal manipulation. My parents had been planning this attack for weeks, consulting attorneys and preparing fraudulent documents while maintaining their loving family facade. They'd looked me in the eye, shared family dinners with me, accepted my trust and affection, while secretly plotting to destroy my financial future through criminal fraud. I sat in my apartment that night, surrounded by legal papers and evidence of my family's betrayal, feeling completely alone in the world. The people who'd raised me, who I'd loved and trusted unconditionally, had conspired to steal everything I'd worked to build. But beneath the shock and pain, something else was growing, a cold, determined anger that would fuel my response to their declaration of war. They'd taught me that family was everything, that loyalty and love conquered all obstacles. Now I would teach them that actions have consequences, fraud has penalties, and betrayal comes with a price they weren't prepared to pay. The battle for my apartment was about to begin, but I had no idea that my investigation would uncover crimes far beyond their attack on me. The initial shock of my parents' lawsuit quickly transformed into focused determination. If they wanted to play legal warfare with fraudulent claims, I would respond with truth evidence and the full force of the justice system they'd apparently forgotten existed. My first call was to Sarah Martinez, a family law attorney whose firm specialized in financial fraud cases. Sarah's office overlooked Elliott Bay from the 32nd floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise, and her reputation for aggressive representation had made her one of the city's most sought-after lawyers. "This is one of the most egregious cases of family financial abuse I've encountered," Sarah said, after reviewing my parents' lawsuit and the fraudulent liens. "They've committed multiple felonies, including forgery fraud and filing false documents with government agencies." Sarah was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s, who'd built her practice defending victims of financial manipulation. Her approach was methodical and thorough, building cases that were impossible to challenge in court. "What are our options?" I asked. "First, we file countersuits for fraud, defamation, attempted theft, and intentional infliction of emotional distress," she explained. "Second, we report the forged documents to law enforcement for criminal prosecution. Third, we gather evidence of any other fraudulent activities they might be involved in." "You think there might be more?" Sarah's expression was grim. "People who commit this level of fraud against family members usually have experience with similar schemes. We need to investigate their business practices, financial history, and previous legal actions." That afternoon, we began building our counterattack. Sarah's team included a forensic accountant, a private investigator, and a paralegal who specialized in public records research. Within 48 hours, they'd uncovered disturbing patterns in my parents' business and financial activities. Thompson Construction had been involved in numerous insurance disputes over the past 5 years, claiming damages that seemed suspiciously frequent and profitable. They'd sued homeowners for additional costs, charged elderly clients for unnecessary repairs, and submitted insurance claims for equipment damage that appeared to be intentional. But the most shocking discovery came when our investigator examined property records and legal filings. My parents had attempted similar lawsuits against other family members, specifically my father's brother Thomas, who'd mysteriously disappeared from family gatherings 2 years earlier. "Your uncle was forced to sell his house in Spokane to pay a fabricated debt your parents claimed he owed," Sarah reported. "The circumstances were nearly identical to your case. Fraudulent loan documents, false liens, and legal threats that forced settlement." My hands shook as I processed this revelation. Uncle Thomas never mentioned any family problems. According to court records, he paid them $45,000 and moved to Montana immediately afterward. There are no records of contact between him and your family since the settlement. I remembered Uncle Thomas as a quiet, gentle man who worked as a high school teacher and coached youth baseball. He'd been close to our family throughout my childhood, attending holidays and family celebrations regularly. Then, suddenly around 2 years ago, he'd stopped visiting and stopped responding to invitations. My parents told us he'd gotten antisocial and didn't want family contact, I said, feeling sick. "More likely, he was traumatized by their extortion and wanted to escape further victimization," Sarah replied. That evening, I called Uncle Thomas at his Montana phone number, which I found through online directories. The conversation was initially awkward with long pauses and careful responses. But when I explained my current legal situation, Uncle Thomas broke down completely. "Oh God, Hardy, I'm so sorry." He sobbed through the phone. "I should have warned you, but I was terrified they'd come after me again." What exactly happened? Thomas's story was horrifyingly familiar. My parents had claimed he'd borrowed money for his house down payment 20 years earlier, a loan that had never existed. They'd produced forged documents, filed false liens, and threatened legal action that would have destroyed his teaching career and retirement savings. "I couldn't afford to fight them in court," Thomas explained. "Teachers don't have money for expensive lawyers, and they had official-looking papers that made their claims seem legitimate. I paid them everything I had and moved away to start over. Why didn't you tell anyone in the family? Who would have believed me? Robert and Margaret were respected community members with a successful business. I was just their weird brother, who'd apparently borrowed money and refused to pay it back. They controlled the narrative completely. The conversation with Uncle Thomas revealed the scope of my parents' criminal enterprise. This wasn't their first fraudulent lawsuit, and I probably wouldn't be their last victim if they weren't stopped. But our investigation uncovered even more extensive criminal activity. Thompson Construction had been systematically defrauding insurance companies, overcharging vulnerable clients, and evading federal taxes through false documentation and hidden income. Sarah's forensic accountant discovered unreported cash payments, inflated expense claims, and fraudulent worker injury reports that had netted my parents hundreds of thousands in illegal profits over the past decade. Your parents have been running a criminal enterprise masquerading as a family business, Sarah explained during our strategy meeting. They've victimized insurance companies, elderly homeowners, government agencies, and family members through sophisticated fraud schemes. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Bank records showing suspicious insurance payments, client contracts with hidden fees and unnecessary add-ons, tax documents with false deductions and unreported income. A pattern of systematic criminal behavior spanning years. What happens next? I asked. We file criminal complaints with federal and state agencies, Sarah said. Insurance fraud crosses state lines, making it a federal crime. Tax evasion involves the IRS. The forged documents fall under state fraud statutes. Your parents are looking at serious prison time if convicted. But before we could file formal complaints, I received an unexpected phone call that would transform our entire strategy and reveal the true scope of my family's manipulation. Hardy, this is Brandon, Jessica's husband. I need to talk to you urgently about something that affects both of us. I hadn't spoken to Brandon since before the divorce proceedings began, but his voice carried an urgency that made me immediately agree to meet. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Bellevue, away from both our neighborhoods. Brandon looked exhausted and stressed with dark circles under his eyes and the strained expression of someone carrying enormous burdens. I know about your parents' lawsuit, he said without preamble. And I have information that's going to shock you about what your family has been doing. Brandon opened a laptop bag and pulled out a thick folder of documents recordings and printed emails that would change everything I thought I knew about my sister and parents. I've been documenting Jessica's behavior and your family's manipulation for over 2 years, he explained. Originally, it was just to protect myself and Emma in divorce proceedings. But what I discovered goes far beyond marital problems. The evidence Brandon shared was devastating. Recordings of Jessica admitting to financial fraud, bragging about manipulating family members, and plotting to steal money from various sources. Videos of her luxury shopping sprees, while claiming poverty to family and friends. Documentation of emotional abuse tactics she'd used against him, and horrifyingly, against Emma. But the most damaging evidence involved my parents' direct participation in Jessica's schemes. Recordings showed Margaret coaching Jessica on how to fake emotional distress for court appearances, how to manipulate family members for financial support, and how to hide assets to avoid divorce settlements. Your mother has been Jessica's partner in manipulation for years, Brandon said quietly. She's taught Jessica every fraud technique, every emotional manipulation strategy, every legal loophole to avoid accountability. One recording was particularly chilling. Jessica and Margaret discussing how to pressure me into selling my apartment, with detailed strategies for emotional manipulation and legal coercion. Hardy won't give up that apartment easily, Jessica's voice said through Brandon's phone speaker. But if we make him choose between family and money, we can guilt him into cooperating. And if guilt doesn't work, there are legal options, Margaret's voice responded. We've done this before, and it's always effective. The casual way they discussed destroying my financial security while laughing about my naive trust was like being stabbed in the heart. These weren't desperate people making difficult choices. They were calculated predators who targeted me as their next victim. Brandon's evidence revealed that my family's criminal enterprise extended beyond insurance fraud and tax evasion. They'd been systematically targeting vulnerable family members and community members through various fraud schemes, using emotional manipulation and legal intimidation to steal money and property. "Why are you sharing this with me?" I asked Brandon. "Because they're destroying innocent people, including Emma," he said. "Your niece is being raised by criminals who use emotional abuse as a parenting tool. She's learning that lying, manipulating, and stealing are normal family behaviors." The collaboration with Brandon would provide the final pieces of evidence needed to bring down my family's criminal operation. But more importantly, it would help us protect Emma from the toxic environment that was shaping her childhood. As I drove home that night, I realized this battle was no longer just about protecting my apartment or defending myself against false accusations. It had become a fight for justice, accountability, and the protection of future victims. My parents had declared war on me, but they'd underestimated their target. I wasn't the compliant, grateful son they'd manipulated for years. I was an educated, resourceful adult with access to legal expertise and criminal evidence that would destroy everything they'd built through fraud and lies. The counterattack was about to begin, and they would learn that actions have consequences. Fraud has penalties, and family betrayal comes with a price they couldn't afford to pay. Working with Sarah Martinez and Brandon, our investigation into my family's criminal activities expanded rapidly. What had started as defense against a fraudulent lawsuit became a comprehensive examination of decades of systematic fraud manipulation and financial crime. Sarah's forensic accountant, Patricia Williams, discovered that Thompson Construction's financial irregularities went far beyond simple tax evasion. The company had been operating what amounted to a sophisticated money laundering operation, using construction projects to hide income from various fraudulent schemes. They've been creating fake subcontractor payments to move money between accounts, Patricia explained during our team meeting. Cash from insurance fraud gets reported as legitimate construction income, making it nearly impossible to trace the original illegal sources. The scheme was remarkably clever and had apparently been operating successfully for years. My parents would commit insurance fraud, receive cash settlements, then filter that money through their construction business by creating false invoices and contractor payments. The illegal income became legitimate business revenue that could be spent openly without raising government suspicions. But our investigation revealed that insurance fraud was just one component of a much larger criminal enterprise. Thompson Construction had been systematically targeting elderly homeowners for unnecessary repairs, vulnerable clients for construction overcharges, and family members for fabricated debt collections. Brandon's evidence provided the missing pieces that connected these various crimes into a cohesive pattern. Recordings showed Jessica and Margaret discussing different fraud targets, comparing manipulation strategies, and celebrating successful thefts with disturbing casual cruelty. Mrs. Peterson never suspected we added $20,000 to her roof repair estimate. Jessica's voice giggled through one particularly damaging recording. She just wrote the check and thanked Dad for taking such good care of her house. Mrs. Peterson was an 83-year-old widow who lived in my parents' neighborhood. I remembered visiting her as a child when she'd baked cookies for the local kids and hosted summer barbecues. The idea of my family stealing from her made me physically ill. Our private investigator, Marcus Chen, tracked down other victims through public records and community connections. What he discovered was a pattern of targeting that had been carefully planned and executed over many years. Thompson Construction specifically sought contracts with elderly homeowners, single mothers, and recent immigrants who were less likely to challenge overcharges or question unnecessary work. They'd build relationships of trust, then gradually exploit those relationships for financial gain. "Your parents are predators," Marcus reported bluntly. "They identify vulnerable people, gain their confidence, then systematically steal from them using their authority and perceived expertise." The victim list was extensive and heartbreaking. Elderly clients charged for repairs that were never performed. Single mothers pressured into expensive upgrades they couldn't afford. Recent immigrants overcharged because they didn't understand local pricing standards or legal protections. But the most disturbing discovery involved my parents' manipulation of government assistance programs. They'd been filing false insurance claims for worker injuries, collecting unemployment benefits while working cash jobs, and claiming tax credits for charitable donations they'd never made. Sarah's team uncovered evidence that my parents had coached Jessica on similar fraud techniques, helping her claim disability benefits for fictitious conditions while working part-time jobs that weren't reported to authorities. Your sister has been collecting disability payments for supposed anxiety and depression while working as a marketing consultant and posting photos of luxury vacations on social media, Sarah explained. The hypocrisy was staggering. My family had lectured me about responsibility, gratitude, and family loyalty, while simultaneously stealing from the government programs designed to help genuinely needy people. As our evidence file grew thicker, I realized the scope of my family's criminal activities probably extended far beyond what we'd discovered. These weren't desperate people making poor choices during financial crisis. They were sophisticated criminals who'd built their entire lifestyle on systematic fraud and theft. But our investigation took an unexpected turn when Brandon shared additional recordings that revealed my family's awareness of potential legal consequences and their specific plans to frame me as a scapegoat if their crimes were discovered. If anyone ever investigates the business finances, we'll blame everything on Hardy, Robert's voice said through Brandon's phone speaker. We'll claim he had access to company accounts and made unauthorized transactions. Hardy's smart enough to have figured out complex fraud schemes, Margaret agreed. No one would be surprised if he turned out to be the real criminal. The casual way they discussed destroying my reputation and potentially sending me to prison for their crimes revealed the true depth of their malice. I wasn't just a victim of their current lawsuit. I was their predetermined patsy for decades of criminal activity. Sarah's expression was grim as we listened to more recordings detailing their scapegoating strategy. They've been planning to frame you for years, she said. This lawsuit isn't just about getting money from your apartment. It's about establishing a narrative where you're the family member with questionable ethics and financial problems. The recordings also revealed that my parents had been coaching Jessica on how to manipulate Emma against Brandon, using their granddaughter as a weapon in psychological warfare designed to break Brandon's spirit and force him into unfavorable divorce settlements. Tell Emma that Daddy doesn't love her anymore because he's trying to take her away from Mommy, Margaret's voice instructed Jessica in one particularly sickening recording. And if she asks why Daddy is being mean, tell her it's because he cares more about money than family, Jessica responded. The emotional abuse of Emma added urgency to our legal strategy. We weren't just fighting to protect my financial assets and reputation. We were fighting to rescue a 6-year-old girl from systematic psychological manipulation by criminals who saw her as a tool for continued fraud and control. Brandon's dedication to protecting Emma, while documenting evidence against my family, had been heroic. For over 2 years, he'd endured emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and character assassination, while secretly recording conversations and gathering evidence that would eventually bring down a criminal enterprise. I stayed in that marriage longer than I should have because I knew Emma needed protection, Brandon explained. But I also knew that someday someone would need this evidence to stop them from destroying other people. Our collaboration with Brandon revealed additional criminal activities that strengthened our case exponentially. Thompson Construction had been involved in bid rigging for municipal contracts, bribing building inspectors to overlook code violations, and submitting false environmental impact reports for development projects. The bid rigging involved coordinating with other construction companies to artificially inflate government contract prices, then splitting the illegal profits through various kickback schemes. Building inspector bribes had allowed them to complete projects with substandard materials and dangerous shortcuts that endangered public safety. Your parents have been putting people's lives at risk to increase their profit margins, Marcus reported after investigating several Thompson construction projects. One particularly egregious example involved a community center renovation where my parents had used inferior electrical wiring and fire suppression systems, then bribed the inspector to approve the dangerous installation. If a fire had occurred, the substandard systems could have resulted in deaths. The environmental fraud involved falsifying reports about soil contamination and water quality for development projects, allowing construction in areas that should have been designated as environmentally protected zones. Each new discovery added to my growing horror at the scope of my family's criminal enterprise. They weren't just stealing money. They were endangering public safety, environmental protection, and community welfare for personal profit. But our investigation was about to reach a crucial turning point when Sarah recommended filing formal criminal complaints with federal and state law enforcement agencies. We have enough evidence to support charges for fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, bribery, environmental crimes, and conspiracy, she explained. The question is whether you're ready to see your parents face serious prison time. The decision felt monumental. Filing criminal complaints would end any possibility of family reconciliation and would likely result in my parents spending their remaining years in federal prison. But allowing them to continue victimizing innocent people was morally unacceptable. They made their choice when they decided to destroy me rather than face accountability, I said. I won't let them keep hurting people. As we prepared to file formal complaints with the FBI, IRS, and State Attorney General's office, I reflected on how completely my understanding of my family had transformed. The people who'd raised me, who I'd loved and admired, were revealed to be sophisticated criminals who'd built their success on systematic fraud and the victimization of vulnerable people. But our investigation had also revealed something else: the power of truth evidence and legal accountability to protect innocent victims and stop criminal behavior. Brandon's courage in documenting abuse had provided the evidence needed to bring justice. Sarah's expertise had transformed that evidence into a legal strategy that would end my family's criminal enterprise. And my decision to fight back, rather than submit to their fraud, had triggered an investigation that would protect countless future victims from similar exploitation. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since receiving my parents' lawsuit, I felt confident that justice would prevail and that the right side would ultimately win. Armed with overwhelming evidence of systematic criminal activity, Sarah Martinez filed comprehensive criminal complaints with multiple law enforcement agencies. The FBI received detailed documentation of interstate fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy charges. The IRS received evidence of tax evasion spanning over a decade. The Washington State Attorney General received proof of local fraud, bribery, and environmental crimes. The response from law enforcement was swift and decisive. Within 72 hours of filing our complaints, federal agents had opened a multi-agency investigation into Thompson Construction and my family's criminal enterprise. Special Agent Amanda Rodriguez, from the FBI's White Collar Crime Division, contacted Sarah to schedule interviews and evidence review. Agent Rodriguez had spent 15 years investigating family-based fraud operations and immediately recognized the sophisticated nature of my parents' schemes. This case involves multiple federal crimes, with damages potentially exceeding $1 million. Agent Rodriguez explained during our initial meeting. We're treating it as a high-priority investigation with serious prison time for anyone convicted. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division assigned Agent Michael Torres to examine Thompson Construction's tax records and financial irregularities. Agent Torres specialized in construction industry fraud and quickly identified patterns that suggested extensive underreporting of income and fraudulent deduction claims. Your parents have been systematically evading federal taxes while claiming benefits they're not entitled to receive, Agent Torres reported. The penalties alone could bankrupt them even before considering criminal charges. But the investigation accelerated dramatically when federal agents froze Thompson Construction's business accounts and began interviewing victims and witnesses. Within days, Additional victims came forward with stories of overcharging unnecessary repairs and fraudulent billing practices. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly widow my family had defrauded for roof repairs, broke down crying when Agent Rodriguez interviewed her at her home. "I trusted Robert and Margaret because they seemed like such nice people," she sobbed. "They charged me $28,000 for work that other contractors said should have cost $8,000. I used my late husband's life insurance money to pay them." Her story was repeated by dozens of other victims across Western Washington. Elderly homeowners who'd been systematically overcharged, single mothers pressured into unnecessary home improvements, recent immigrants charged premium prices for substandard work. The federal investigation also uncovered evidence that my parents had been involved in similar fraud schemes in Oregon and California, making their crimes subject to federal racketeering charges, with potential sentences of 20 years in prison. But my family's response to the investigation revealed the desperation and panic that comes with knowing their criminal empire was collapsing. Margaret attempted to withdraw all funds from business accounts and flee to Canada, but federal agents had already frozen their assets and flagged them for international travel monitoring. When she was stopped at the Seattle airport with $47,000 in cash and one-way tickets to Vancouver, she was arrested for attempting to flee prosecution. Robert's response was to blame everything on Jessica, claiming he'd been manipulated by his daughter into participating in fraud schemes he didn't understand. This strategy backfired when investigators played recordings of him planning and executing various crimes with obvious sophistication and premeditation. "Your father is trying to present himself as an innocent victim of family manipulation," Agent Rodriguez reported. "But the evidence shows he was the primary architect of most fraud schemes." Jessica's response was the most revealing and damaging to their defense strategy. Instead of showing remorse or accepting responsibility, she became increasingly erratic and vindictive, making threats against witnesses and attempting to intimidate victims into withdrawing their complaints. When Mrs. Peterson received anonymous phone calls threatening violence if she continued cooperating with federal investigators, phone records traced the calls directly to Jessica's cell phone. The witness intimidation charges added another federal felony to Jessica's growing list of criminal violations. But the most dramatic turning point came when Jessica, facing potential decades in prison, finally broke down during FBI questioning and agreed to provide information about the full scope of their criminal activities in exchange for a reduced sentence. Jessica's confession revealed crimes that our investigation hadn't discovered. Thompson Construction had been involved in human trafficking, hiring undocumented workers, and confiscating their identification documents to prevent them from leaving or reporting labor violations. They'd also been involved in drug money laundering, using construction projects to hide profits from local drug distribution networks. "Your sister's confession has opened up multiple new federal investigations," Agent Rodriguez explained. "The human trafficking charges alone carry mandatory minimum sentences that could result in life imprisonment for your parents." The revelation that my family had been involved in human trafficking and drug money laundering added a new level of horror to their criminal enterprise. These weren't just financial crimes committed for personal profit. They were serious felonies that destroyed lives and enabled other criminal organizations. But Jessica's confession also revealed the specific targeting strategy my family had used to identify me as their next major victim. They'd been monitoring my financial success for years, planning the fraudulent lawsuit as their most ambitious theft to date. Hardy was supposed to be the score that let us retire comfortably, Jessica admitted during recorded FBI interviews. "We knew he'd saved enough money to make the whole scheme worthwhile." The casual way she discussed destroying my life and financial security showed a complete lack of empathy or moral understanding. I wasn't her brother who'd supported and loved her throughout our lives. I was a target whose success made him valuable for exploitation. As federal charges mounted against my family, their defense strategies became increasingly desperate and self-destructive. Robert hired expensive criminal defense attorneys, using money obtained through insurance fraud, adding to the evidence of criminal proceeds. Margaret attempted to claim mental illness as a defense, but her sophisticated planning and execution of fraud schemes contradicted claims of diminished capacity. Jessica's cooperation with investigators provided detailed information about their methods, victims, and criminal partnerships. Her willingness to testify against our parents in exchange for reduced charges completely destroyed any possibility of a unified family defense. The federal investigation also revealed that my parents had attempted similar fraudulent lawsuits against other family members beyond Uncle Thomas. Robert's sister in California had been targeted for fabricated debts 3 years earlier, but had died of cancer before they could complete their legal theft. Your aunt left a substantial estate, and your parents filed claims against it, using the same forged document techniques they used against you, Agent Rodriguez reported. Her children are still fighting those fraudulent claims in probate court. The pattern of systematic family victimization showed that my parents' criminal enterprise specifically targeted their own relatives, using emotional manipulation and fabricated legal documents to steal inheritances, properties, and savings from people who trusted them. As the federal investigation expanded, my parents' criminal defense strategy shifted toward attempting plea bargains that would minimize their prison sentences. But the scope of their crimes and the number of victims made favorable plea deals unlikely. Your parents are looking at federal sentences of 15 to 20 years, even with full cooperation, Agent Rodriguez explained. The human trafficking and money laundering charges carry mandatory minimums that eliminate most plea bargaining options. The justice system that my parents had tried to manipulate through fraudulent lawsuits and forged documents was now operating exactly as designed, protecting innocent victims and holding criminals accountable for their actions. But beyond legal consequences, the investigation had revealed something more important: the power of truth and evidence to overcome even the most sophisticated criminal manipulation. Brandon's courage in documenting abuse, my decision to fight back rather than submit, and Sarah's expertise in building legal cases had combined to bring down a criminal enterprise that had victimized hundreds of people. As I prepared for my parents' trial and sentencing, I reflected on how completely this experience had transformed my understanding of family loyalty and justice. The people who'd raised me had turned out to be criminals who'd planned to destroy me for personal profit. But the legal system, investigative agencies, and honest people working within that system had provided protection and justice that my biological family had never offered. The reckoning was almost complete, but the most important lessons were still to come. 6 months after federal agents arrested my parents and Jessica on multiple felony charges, I stood in the same King County courthouse where their fraudulent lawsuit had been filed. But this time, I was there for their sentencing hearing, watching as the judge imposed consequences for decades of criminal behavior. Robert was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for conspiracy fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and human trafficking. His construction business was permanently shut down, and all assets obtained through criminal activity were forfeited to compensate victims. Margaret received 15 years for her role in planning and executing fraud schemes, with additional penalties for attempting to flee prosecution. The judge specifically noted her manipulation of Jessica and her coaching of emotional abuse tactics as aggravating factors that justified the severe sentence. Jessica, because of her cooperation with federal investigators, received a reduced sentence of 8 years in prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. She also lost all parental rights to Emma, with sole custody awarded to Brandon, based on extensive evidence of emotional abuse and manipulation. As I watched my parents being led away in shackles, I felt a complex mixture of sadness, relief, and justice. These were the people who'd raised me, taught me to walk and ride a bicycle, celebrated my achievements, and comforted me during childhood disappointments. But they were also criminals who'd planned to destroy my life and had victimized hundreds of innocent people through sophisticated fraud schemes. The legal resolution of their crimes brought closure to years of systematic abuse and manipulation, not just of me, but of vulnerable community members who trusted them. Mrs. Peterson and other elderly victims would receive financial restitution from asset forfeiture proceedings. Uncle Thomas finally had official validation of the fraud he'd suffered and was eligible for compensation. But the most important positive outcome involved Emma's rescue from a toxic family environment that would have shaped her into another generation of manipulators and fraudsters. Under Brandon's sole custody, she was beginning to heal from years of emotional manipulation and learning healthier ways to understand family relationships. Brandon and I had developed a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared values rather than biological obligation. Our collaboration in exposing my family's crimes had revealed his character integrity and dedication to protecting innocent people from harm. Emma's having nightmares less frequently now, Brandon reported during one of our weekly coffee meetings. Her therapist says she's making progress in understanding that love doesn't come with manipulation and threats. Watching Emma gradually recover from the psychological abuse inflicted by my family was both heartbreaking and inspiring. She was learning that adults could be trustworthy, that family relationships didn't require constant emotional drama, and that her feelings and boundaries deserved respect. My apartment, which my parents had tried to steal through fraudulent lawsuits, had become more than just property. It represented my independence, my refusal to be victimized, and my commitment to building a life based on honest work, rather than criminal manipulation. But the experience had taught me broader lessons about family loyalty and personal responsibility that extended far beyond legal victories and financial protection. I learned that biological relationships don't automatically create moral obligations, especially when those relationships involve abuse, manipulation, and criminal behavior. True family is built on mutual respect, honesty, and genuine care for each other's well-being. I learned that enabling destructive behavior in the name of family loyalty actually harms everyone involved, including the person whose bad choices are being protected from consequences. My parents' criminal enterprise flourished because family members and community members chose to ignore warning signs rather than demand accountability. I learned that standing up for truth and justice, even against family members, ultimately serves everyone's best interests. My decision to fight back, rather than submit to their fraud, protected future victims and created opportunities for healing and accountability. Most importantly, I learned that real strength comes from refusing to be victimized, regardless of who the victimizers are, or what emotional manipulation they employ to maintain control. The legal battle had also connected me with Uncle Thomas, who returned from Montana to testify at my parents' trial. Our renewed relationship revealed family history I'd never known, including stories of my grandparents' integrity and honesty that my parents had completely abandoned. "Your grandfather would be proud of how you handled this situation," Uncle Thomas told me after the sentencing hearing. "He always taught us that character is revealed during difficult times, and you showed real character by choosing justice over convenience." Uncle Thomas moved back to Washington State, and we began hosting family gatherings that included Brandon, Emma, and other relatives who'd been driven away by my parents' toxic behavior. These new family traditions were built on honesty, mutual support, and genuine affection rather than manipulation and financial exploitation. My professional life had also benefited from the experience. The analytical skills and attention to detail I'd developed as a software engineer had been crucial in investigating my family's crimes and building legal cases against them. Several colleagues had faced similar family manipulation, and I'd been able to provide guidance and support based on my experience. I also established a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of family financial abuse, working with attorneys, social workers, and law enforcement agencies to identify and prosecute cases of financial exploitation within families. The organization provided legal assistance counseling services and education about recognizing and preventing family-based fraud. Family financial abuse is more common than most people realize. I explained during speaking engagements at community centers and professional organizations. But victims often don't report it because they feel ashamed or believe family loyalty requires accepting abuse. The speaking engagements and victim advocacy work had given new meaning and purpose to the traumatic experience of fighting my family's criminal enterprise. Instead of just surviving their attack, I was using that experience to protect other people from similar victimization. As I reflected on the complete transformation of my life over the past year, I realized that my parents' attempt to destroy me had actually created opportunities for genuine growth, meaningful relationships, and important work that I never would have discovered otherwise. Their lawsuit had been intended to steal my apartment and savings while positioning me as a scapegoat for their crimes. Instead, it had exposed their entire criminal enterprise, brought justice for hundreds of victims, and connected me with people whose values aligned with my own commitment to honesty and accountability. The apartment they'd tried to steal had become headquarters for victim advocacy work that was making a real difference in protecting vulnerable people from financial exploitation. The money they'd tried to extort was funding legal assistance and counseling services for other families dealing with similar abuse. Their betrayal had taught me the difference between family relationships built on manipulation and control versus relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care. The family I'd lost through their criminal behavior had been replaced by chosen family members who shared my values and supported my growth rather than exploiting my success. On Thanksgiving Day, exactly 1 year after my parents filed their fraudulent lawsuit, I hosted dinner in my apartment for the family I'd chosen, rather than the one I'd inherited. Brandon and Emma, Uncle Thomas, Sarah Martinez, and her husband, Agent Rodriguez, and her family, and several other friends and colleagues gathered around my dining room table to celebrate gratitude, honesty, and the power of justice to create positive change. Emma, now 7 years old and thriving under Brandon's loving custody, asked me to explain why her mother and grandparents weren't at Thanksgiving dinner. Sometimes people make choices that hurt other people, I explained carefully. When that happens, there have to be consequences so they can learn to make better choices. Your mom and grandparents are learning to make better choices now, but that takes time. Will they be able to come to Thanksgiving next year? She asked with the innocent hope of childhood. Maybe someday, I replied honestly. But for now, we're celebrating with people who care about us and treat us with kindness and respect. As I looked around the table at people who'd become family through shared values, rather than shared genetics, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought us together. My parents' attempt to destroy me had actually created the foundation for building a life of meaning, purpose, and genuine connection. Their criminal enterprise had been built on lies, manipulation, and the exploitation of vulnerable people. But our response had been built on truth, accountability, and the protection of innocent victims. The contrast between those two approaches to life had taught me everything I needed to know about character integrity and the type of person I wanted to be. The legal battle was over, but the lessons would continue shaping my choices and relationships for the rest of my life. I'd learned that standing up for truth and justice, even when it's difficult and painful, creates opportunities for growth and positive change that make the struggle worthwhile. Most importantly, I'd learned that real family is built on love, respect, and mutual support rather than biological connections or emotional manipulation. The family gathered around my Thanksgiving table had chosen to be there because we cared about each other's well-being and shared common values about honesty and accountability. As we shared stories, laughter, and genuine gratitude, I realized that my parents' greatest failure hadn't been their criminal behavior or their attempt to steal from me. Their greatest failure had been their inability to recognize that true family wealth comes from building relationships based on love and respect, rather than exploitation and control. They'd taught me that lesson through their negative example, and for that education, I was genuinely grateful. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Sometimes the people closest to us can be the ones who test our values the most. I'd love to hear your thoughts about handling family conflicts and standing up for your principles in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, or helped you think about your own family relationships, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming difficult situations and finding strength in unexpected places. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of setting boundaries with family members, please share this story with them. Sometimes we all need reminding that choosing truth over convenience is the path to genuine happiness and peace. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that values honesty, accountability, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult. I hope your own family relationships are built on love and respect, and I wish you all the strength you need to protect those relationships while staying true to your values.